Okay. Good morning, good afternoon. Good afternoon, it must be morning somewhere. And welcome to the Wilson Center. I'm Jane Harmon. I'm the president and CEO of the center, and I'm a huge admirer of many people whom you will hear from shortly. Some of our best supporters are in the front rows this afternoon, and I especially want to recognize Alma Gildenhorn, whose husband Joe will speak shortly, and I'll talk about him in a moment. I also want to recognize Hugh McKinnon, who is the co-chair of our Canada Institute Board, and here's Kathy Gildenhorn. I have just noticed her, who is, I'm delighted you're here, Kathy, and I will talk about others, but thank you, all of you, for your support for the Wilson Center, now ranked the number 5 think tank in the United States, number 10 internationally, and for the second year in a row, the top U.S. think tank to watch. So, we also have with us the ambassadors from Ukraine and Montenegro, and the chargé d'affaires from Serbia. It's my pleasure to introduce today's event on the year ahead in European security and to welcome Switzerland's pretty new ambassador to the United States, Martin de Hinden, immediately to my left. He comes to his current post from the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, where he served as director since 2008. He's also held a number of senior diplomatic positions with the Swiss missions to Paris, Nigeria, and the UN. Those are just a few highlights of a long career in diplomacy. We credit him, too, with suggesting our wonderful collaboration on President Wilson and International Geneva. Center scholar John Milton Cooper will speak on that subject in more detail soon after the ambassador gives his introductory remarks. President Wilson's achievements are still recorded throughout the city of Geneva, at the Palais Wilson, where the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights is based, and at Wilson Memorial, and by the Wilson Memorial Sphere that sits outside the Palais des Nations. I spent 2 years in Geneva myself, 1 year during high school and a second after law school. And in keeping with Wilson's spirit, the center has always enjoyed a close relationship with the Swiss Embassy. We want to pay tribute to the prior ambassador, Manuel Seger, with whom we hosted many events and who was kind enough to offer his residence several times for Wilson Center events. We still count him a dear friend. Now, to turn to our own former board chairman in the middle, Joe Gildenhorn. Joe served as United States ambassador to Switzerland from 1989 to 1993. While there, he worked closely with the Swiss in developing sanctions against Saddam Hussein. And Joe, as I think all of you know, became chair of our board some years ago and served with enormous distinction for 11 years. I think he broke all records. And just prior to walking in here, we had a small reception in the Gildenhorn Room at the Wilson Center, one of our loveliest meeting rooms, and we hope a tribute to our very dear friends, former, current, and future supporters, the Gildenhorns. With Ambassador de Hinden today, we'll mark the launch of a new partnership, our Swiss Fellowship Program, a joint effort with the Europa Institute in Zurich. It celebrates President Wilson's spirit and the good work of cooperative security. The Europa Institute's Andreas Kellerhaus, right there, will moderate a conversation about what we plan to do. Our inaugural Swiss Fellows, Adis Mirzanovic and Eric Jentges, who are, I think, where are they? There, right there, sitting next to the one and only Christian Osterman, who is the head of our Global Europe program and our History and Public Policy program, are with us too. They've been resident at the center for the past 4 months. Tomorrow is their last day, boo, and they will be missed. But it's our hope that today's Swiss Day will be, going forward, an annual event on the Wilson Center calendar. The relationship it celebrates is strong and intellectually vital. So, my sincere thanks to Ambassador Martin de Hinden and Professor Andreas Kellerhaus for their commitment to this friendship. Please join me in welcoming the ambassador right now.
Thank you very much. Let me start with thanks. Thanks to Jane Harmon, the dynamic president and director of the Wilson Center. Thanks to the Wilson Center and its staff. Thanks to the University of Zurich, my own alma mater, and Professor Keller-Hals. Thanks to the Gildenhorns who have been here when we arrived, my wife and me, as ambassador to help us start in Washington, and thanks to all of you for attending today's discussion. This day marks the beginning of a new and closer and very promising cooperation. Jane Harmon has underlined exactly in what direction we want to go. I will not repeat all of this. Happy particularly that the two first let's say schoolers, they told me it's a little bit an odd situation. It's almost the last day and we are starting something where they play a role, but we are very happy to have them here and to continue, of course. Scholarships are important in fostering the relations between scientific institutions in Switzerland and the Wilson Center, which just last week, as it has been mentioned, ranked the number 5 think tank in the United States. But this isn't just a start, it is much more also a continuation of a long tradition linking Wilson to Switzerland. I mean President Woodrow Wilson, who played a key role in helping Geneva to become a major hub for international relations and multilateralism. Almost 100 years ago, 1920, Wilson was instrumental for Geneva in establishing the League of Nations. Some say because he especially liked Geneva. The competitor at that time was Brussels. Another reason was probably Switzerland's neutrality. Wilson felt that if Germany ever joined the League, Switzerland would be a neutral and a good meeting place. This was the starting point for Geneva in becoming what it is today, one of the UN centers and one of the major locations for international organizations worldwide. The link between Geneva and the Wilsons did not end with President Wilson's death in 1924. Every year, his wife continued to travel to Geneva to observe the proceedings of the League of Nations. President Wilson's role in making Geneva what it is now is well recognized and remembered in Geneva. The first home of the League of Nations was renamed in Palais Wilson after the president's death in 1924. The city is well dotted with memorials, landmarks, streets and squares honoring Wilson. President Wilson's role in the development of Geneva as an international center and a center of humanitarian activities cannot be underestimated. That is why I am so pleased that there is a closer and closer cooperation between the Wilson Center in DC, Swiss institutions such as the University of Zurich, and the Swiss government. Thank you very much.
I'm going to give my message from here. Is this on? It's on. First of all, thank you, Jane, for your very, very generous introduction. You're a great leader of the Wilson Center, and I feel very blessed to be associated with you. Ambassador de Hinden, let me again welcome you to Washington. I know you were just in Davos and Geneva, and so I'm sure you are a little bit tired, but we thank you for being here. And with your background, your brilliant diplomatic background, I know that you will represent your country with great diplomacy, and we wish you well in your tenure. Thank you again for being here. As former chairman of the board of the Wilson Center and former United States ambassador to Switzerland, I'm really delighted to be here. I'll call this Swiss Day at the Wilson Center. I commend Jane Harmon, our our leader, the Wilson Center, the University of Zurich, and the Swiss government for entering into cooperative agreements that are now being implemented. And these agreements will do so much to strengthen relations between Switzerland and the United States. As someone closely connected with the Wilson Center in Switzerland, I can say that this is both exciting and positive to have a Swiss Day at the Wilson Center, and I hope this will be an annual event, so we'll keep that in mind. And I'm very pleased that we will be having more Swiss scholars participate at the Wilson Center. We appreciate the important contributions these scholars make, and there's no doubt that the center will continue to benefit enormously from the collaboration. Switzerland today plays a critical role in Europe, and the Swiss government is to be commended for its leadership this past year when it served as the chairman of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. The expanded role that Switzerland plays internationally is of utmost importance to the national interests of the United States and indeed the entire global community. We are now celebrating the centennial years of Woodrow Wilson's presidency. He had a special place in his heart for Switzerland, and indeed, as we, I think, mentioned in Geneva, there is a monumental building dedicated to him, to President Wilson, known as Palais Wilson, a very exciting building. President Wilson would be pleased today, 100 years later, that the Wilson Center and Switzerland are partners in a scholarly exchange. Again, thank you, Jane, Ambassador de Hinden, and our friends from the University of Zurich for a very exciting day. Thank you for being here.
Mrs. Harman, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen. About 2 years ago, the Europa Institute at the University of Zurich was approached by the Swiss government. And we were asked whether we would be interested to establish a cooperation with the Woodrow Wilson Center here in Washington. Of course we were. Who would not like to be involved with this great institution? For many years, the transatlantic friendship and cooperation between Europe and the United States, and especially between Switzerland and the United States, has been a central interest of our institute. We firmly believe that this unique relationship, based on same values and principles like democracy, rule of law, free market and free society in general, has to be cherished and appreciated and constantly be strengthened. The idea of the two sister republics still is alive. We are therefore grateful for this cooperation, which enables us to send every year 2 fellows for 4 months here to the Woodrow Wilson Center. I would like to express my great thankfulness to Jane Herman and Christian Ostermann for making this possible and for the great transatlantic cooperation, and to Ambassador de Hinden and his team for initiating and supporting this idea. We are looking forward to a long cooperation to the benefit of all of us. Thank you very much.
They're my railing.
Good afternoon. John Milton Cooper is an American historian, author, and educator. His specialization is in the late 19th century and early 20th century American diplomatic history. Dr. Cooper is Professor Emeritus from the University of Wisconsin in Madison. His most recent book, Woodrow Wilson, A Biography, was published in 2009. It was described at the time as the first major biography of America's 28th president in nearly 2 decades. The book was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for biography and autobiography. Dr. Cooper was a public policy scholar at the Wilson Center in 2007 and 2008. John, welcome back to the center.
Thank you very much, Mike. Grüezi miteinander. Bonjour. Buon pomeriggio. Buenos Aires. I thought it might be nice to open by using the 4 languages of the Swiss Confederation. Now, I'll haul down some false colors. I do not pretend to speak those languages. The only one I can even make my way in a little bit is French, and I know enough not to say 70 or 80 if I happen to be in Geneva or Lausanne. My reason for the greeting is to pay a quick personal tribute to Switzerland and to the place that it has in our family's life. Some years ago, our son spent his senior year of high school as an American Field Service exchange student in Canton Obwalden. He lived with a family of cheesemakers in the town of Alpnach, a very different place from his hometown of Madison, Wisconsin, and a very different family from ours. But it was a great experience for him, and by extension for the rest of us. So I just want to acknowledge a very warm spot that Switzerland has in our hearts. I've been asked to say a few words about the League of Nations and about how it came to be located in Geneva. And what I'd like to do is address the second of those subjects first. Now, originally, and when Mike asked me to do it, I thought, oh, there's not much story to tell. Well, as far as I knew from my studies of Wilson and World War I, there never seemed to be much question that the League would be located in Geneva. But as the ambassador pointed out, there was some competition. I want to come back to that in just a moment. In fact, President Wilson wanted to have the peace conference in Geneva, and for reasons that will come out a little bit later. But he bowed to the insistence of the French. The conference absolutely must meet in Paris. But that was the first mention of Geneva. When the war ended in November 1918, it was not at all clear that there would even be a League of Nations. And really, Wilson's first achievement at that peace conference was to oversee the outlining of the structure and the functions of the League in the space of 3 weeks, and doing this on top of his other work at the conference. And then he presented the draft covenant of the League of Nations to the full peace conference on February 14th, 1919. This was a real coup, and it seemed to bode extremely well for Wilson's plans for a new world order and way to maintain peace. Now, things turned out differently, and I will say something about that a bit later. As soon as the draft covenant was announced, the jockeying began among several nations to get the League headquartered in a city in their respective countries. The main contenders were The Hague, Brussels, and Geneva. And the representatives of all 3 nations and cities lobbied energetically among the delegations at Paris for their respective cities. Right after he presented the draft covenant, President Wilson had to come back to the United States for a 3-week trip to attend to business at the end of the session of Congress, and then he did some preliminary lobbying for the League. When he got back to Paris, his principal deputy, Colonel House, told him that the Swiss had been particularly energetic in promoting Geneva as the future home of the League. And how they prevailed, I think, is an interesting story that involves a person who became well known in Switzerland and in international circles. His name was William Rappard. He was 34 years old when he first met President Wilson in 1917. Now, William Rappard had been born in New York City. He was the son of a Swiss businessman who'd been working in this country, and he spent several childhood years here before his family went home. He received his education in Switzerland, but he maintained ties to the United States, and he returned here to teach economics at Harvard for 2 years before he became professor of economics at the University of Geneva. He was in America in 1917 as part of a diplomatic mission to deal with the problems that had been created by this country's entry into the war against Germany, particularly food exports from the United States. Drawing on his academic connections, Rappard captured the rare prize of an hour-long interview with the professor turned president, and that took place on November 1st, 1917. Rappard dutifully discussed some current issues, but the interview soon took on a broader cast. It's fair to say that Wilson really enchanted Rappard. In his report of the meeting, he described the president as the fulfillment of the type of Anglo-Saxon intellectual in free and full possession of exceptional moral and cerebral faculties. He himself is a defender, the most convinced, the most fervent, the most influential of the principles which lie not only at the base of his own political system, but whose triumph in the world can alone assure our national future. In the course of the meeting, Rappard reminded Wilson of what he had written earlier as an academic political scientist about the Swiss Confederation as a model for joining different peoples together, and Wilson admitted that it was an inspiration for his thinking about a League of Nations. Rappard met with Wilson twice more. A year later, soon after the armistice, and just before Wilson went to Paris for the peace conference, he saw the young Swiss again for an hour. Well, evidently Rappard had made as much of an impression, a hit with Wilson, as Wilson had made with him. Wilson spoke frankly, even indiscreetly, with Rappard. For example, he said about his peace plans, "I'm not going to relax in the least. I'm going over to Europe because the Allied governments don't want me to." As for a League of Nations, which Wilson was not saying much about publicly at that time, he noted to Rappard noted, he hopes to do in Paris what he tried to do without success some years ago with South and Central America, to extend the Monroe Doctrine so as to make it a principle of mutual protection. Not a big brother affair, but a real partnership. The two also discussed freer trade among nations, which had been one of Wilson's 14 points, and that was the cause to which Rappard dedicated his life's work. Wilson affirmed, economic policy of League, not necessarily free trade, but no discrimination among members. Their final meeting was a more hurried one in Paris on February 12, 1919, just 2 days before Wilson unveiled the draft covenant. Again, the president did not hold back. About the French, he complained, petty, stupid, insane, obsession. How they have tormented me with devastated regions. Now that I have seen Reims, they say that it is not enough. Say I am without heart. Wish to starve Germany, then make her pay. Most important to our subject today, Wilson said this to Rappard. Seat, League of Nations, seat, favorable to Geneva. Suggests Switzerland offers site with privilege extraterritoriality. Sympathy for Geneva. Perhaps my Presbyterianism. The two men didn't meet again. Rappard joined the other Swiss representatives in Paris lobbying for Geneva. Later, he held posts in the League himself, continued to teach at the University of Geneva, and worked for freer trade. Quite appropriately, the present site of the World Trade Organization in Geneva is named Centre William Rappard. The decision to locate the headquarters in Geneva came on April 10, 1919, at a meeting of the commission that was drafting the covenant to set up the organization. The Belgian member made an impassioned plea for Brussels, and he had the backing of the other members except the British. But that nation's commission member, Lord Robert Cecil, did what he often did. He stayed mum, and he left the heavy lifting of argument to Wilson, and the president took it up. He gave what he later described to his wife and doctor as a strong speech. And I'm just going to quote to you from the commission's minutes. President Wilson yielded to none in his admiration for Belgium, but the present question was not one of awarding honors, but of finding the best surroundings for international deliberation. The sympathies of the war should be set aside, otherwise it might be thought that the League was a mere coalition of allies, moved by hatreds born of the war. Our object was to bring about friendly relations between all peoples. We wished to rid the world of the sufferings of war. We should not obtain this result if we chose a town where the memory of this war would prevent impartial discussion. Something about the Paris Peace Conference, too, there, perhaps. The peace of the world could not be secured by perpetuating international hatreds. Geneva was already the site of the International Red Cross, which had placed itself at the service of both groups of belligerents, which so far as possible have remained unaffected by the antipathies provoked by the war. Moreover, Switzerland was a people vowed to absolute neutrality by its constitution and its blend of races and languages. It was marked out to be the meeting place of other peoples desiring to undertake a work of peace and cooperation. The choice of Geneva did not mean that we did not recognize the eminent merits of Belgium and of Brussels. There could be no comparison between the two peoples from the point of view of their conduct during the war. The capitals of other neutral nations might have been proposed, but none had behaved so impartially as Switzerland. Switzerland had always acted with dignity. She had suffered from the war, and she had gained the respects of both groups of belligerents. And that was that. And I think it is fair to say that the League of Nations owed its location in Geneva to Woodrow Wilson. What about this new organization, the League of Nations? I'll be very brief about this because there are people in this room and in this center who, from both study and experience, know much more about international organizations than I do. All I'd like to do is try to expel two myths about the League. One is that it was just an earlier version of the United Nations by another name. The other is that it epitomizes the failure of collective security. Well, like all good myths, these two have important kernels of truth. But also, like myths, they distort the truth and fail to tell the whole truth. First, was the League a precursor of the UN? Of course it was. Their structures are nearly identical, and somebody once wrote that the UN paid the League the supreme compliment of copying it. But it didn't copy the League completely. The UN Charter has no explicit collective security clause equivalent to Article 10 of the League Covenant. What's more, thanks to the Security Council veto, the UN can't intervene if any of the major powers objects. The League could have done that. In fact, the League was the precursor not only of the UN, but of NATO as well. If the French had had their way at the peace conference, the League would have been NATO, maybe NATO on steroids 30 years earlier. In their meeting in February 1919, that's the French. In February 1919, Wilson told Rapin that the French would like an international army against Germany. Wilson stood firmly against that conception of the League because, as he said, and you heard that in what he said in the League Commission, he didn't want this to be just an alliance of victors. He also knew that the U.S. Senate would not agree to make American forces part of an international army. But he did believe in genuine collective security with the use of force as a last resort, and he did sign a separate security pact with Britain and France. As for the present-day UN, I think it's safe to say that President Wilson would be disappointed. He often said that without Article 10, the League would be a mere debating society. Sounds kind of like some recent criticisms of the UN, doesn't it? What about the League as an epitome of international failure? I remember once seeing a political cartoon that showed President Truman dragging the UN to the grave of the League of Nations. Well, the glaring fact remains that the League did not prevent World War II. It seems to me the important question is why? Now, this will get into the blame game. It's unavoidable. And believe me, I'm going to throw the stones from my own glass house. The League failed because the major powers refused to exercise the will and put the muscle behind it when the crunch times came. And I think you can pick out two particular junctures, important junctures. Manchuria in 1931 and Ethiopia in 1935. In both cases, the international community could and should have stopped the aggressors. In both cases, I think a hefty share of the blame falls squarely on the shoulders of my country, the United States. Well, wait a minute, how can I say that? The U.S., after all, did not become a member of the League. I think the answer is self-evident. I agree with the most recent student of the Paris Peace Conference, Margaret McMillan, who says that the settlement became the peace that failed, not because of what was or wasn't in the treaties negotiated at Paris, but because the leaders of the signatory nations later failed to abide by and enforce this settlement. And the first nation to signal that it was not going to live up to the terms of the treaty was our own, the United States. As you all know, President Wilson failed to get the Senate to consent to the treaty, which contained the League Covenant, and we later signed, under President Harding, a separate peace treaty with Germany, which actually duplicated the Versailles Treaty minus the League Covenant. The failure to join in the settlement and become a member of the League was, I think, a tragedy, and it could have turned out differently. League membership enjoyed wide popular support here and had the backing of prominent figures of both parties. Now, please forgive me, and Mike will get this one. Please forgive me for using an extremely parochial comparison. But there's an old crack that the houses, the residential houses at Harvard, the Harvard houses were a Princeton idea financed by Yale money. Well, say something similar about the League idea. It was first seriously proposed by a Harvard man, ex-President Theodore Roosevelt, when he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize in Norway in 1910. It was next put forward and lobbied for soon after the outbreak of World War I by an organization called the League to Enforce Peace, which was headed by a Yale man, ex-President William Howard Taft. And then, of course, it was set up by a Princeton man, President Woodrow Wilson. Notice, too, that Roosevelt and Taft were Republicans, and Taft often boasted that his organization, which was known as the LEP, had more Republican than Democratic members. By the time of the peace conference, Roosevelt had died, but Taft remained a strong League man. Likewise, in the Senate, the Republican leader, Henry Cabot Lodge, favored membership in the League of Nations, although within strict limits, and he supported the Security Pact with Britain and France. Why things turned out so badly owed a lot to a sour partisan atmosphere. I'm sad to say reminiscent of what we see today, but even more to the physical collapse of President Wilson, who suffered a stroke that left him unable to function in office, really, and badly warped his political judgment. Consider how different things might have been if this country had joined in the League, even perhaps with restrictions. In the case of Manchuria, the League kept deferring to the United States because we possessed the naval presence in the Western Pacific, and even more important, the economic leverage that could have deterred the Japanese aggression. In the case of Ethiopia, the League again deferred to the United States because we supplied most of the oil on which the Italian forces depended. In both cases, we weren't there. It wasn't just because we weren't part of the League. We chose to look the other way and take no risks that might possibly ultimately involve military action. Even so, the League's mild verbal condemnations of Japan and Italy impelled those nations to quit the organization, and Germany already had immediately after Hitler came to power. Yes, you can say that the League failed, but that failure was merely a symptom of the lack of will to maintain the settlement that had come out of World War I. During World War II, we Americans vowed never again would we turn our backs on international responsibility. Wilson's reputation, which had sunk into the gutter in the 1930s, now soared to the heights of apotheosis. Political support for an activist foreign policy took a fresh turn, and the new word of the day was bipartisanship. Presidents Roosevelt and Truman both took pains to include members of the opposition party and members of both houses of Congress in conferences, high-ranking positions, and major decisions. All of this, of course, stood in stark contrast to what had prevailed at the end of the previous war. I might note that one of the major proponents of a strong bipartisan foreign policy after World War II was Senator Henry Cabot Lodge, Jr., the grandson of Wilson's critic and adversary. Now, the younger Lodge always maintained that he was not departing from his grandfather's views, and although his behavior was different, I think he was right. So today, if we look at the League of Nations, I don't think it's correct to write it off as a great international failure. If you want to see its legacy today, I'd say don't look to the East River in New York. Rather, forgive me, Mr. Ambassador, look to the place where they decided not to locate the League's headquarters. Look to Brussels, and look at the actions of NATO and the European Union with respect to Russia and Iran. I don't want to be too sanguine. Russian incursions in the Ukraine, we're going to hear more about this in our panel, or perhaps, God forbid, in the Baltics, I think could pose very painful questions about the willingness to put our might where our mouths are. But we are acting as if we really do believe in collective security. And those beliefs owe a lot to that organization that was located in Geneva. Ironically, the magnificent building to house the League, the Palais des Nations, opened on the shores of Lac Léman in 1939, just before the outbreak of World War II in Europe. But I take that coincidence not as a sign of failure, but as a milestone on the road to true international order and responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you, John Milton Cooper. That was marvelous, and it's a lot of food for thought for the center and for trying to take this centennial of Woodrow Wilson to a new level and doing a program at some point in Geneva. Thank you very much for being with us, and we will now move to the panel discussion.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we now come to the panel discussion on security challenges in Europe in 2015. The panelists are, as you can see, the Swiss ambassador Martin Dahind, and among other things, he was a former head of the Swiss OSCE desk, and so an expert in this field as well. Then we have Vladimir Jovicic, chargé d'affaires, the Embassy of Serbia. You might know that Serbia has taken over the presidency of the OSCE on the beginning of this year, following Switzerland in this function. Then we have Mr. Maxim Trudiolobov. He is a Russian-born journalist and a profound expert on Russia and Russian politics in general. And then finally we have Ambassador Alexander Chali. He's the foreign advisor to the Ukraine president and the first deputy foreign minister of the Ukraine as well. Each of the panelists first will provide a short statement of a couple of minutes on how he sees the security challenges in Europe in 2015. Afterwards, we'll have a brief discussion here on the panel, and then I would like to open the floor and make a answer and question session. I would like to ask you to participate in this discussion actively. Now, afterwards, we then have a reception here in the center. So first, I would like to invite Ambassador Dahind for his statement. Please, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Thank you. The year 2014 was a special one. It was a special year for European security and also for Switzerland. The outbreak of the hostilities in Ukraine unveiled the fragility on the European continent and gaps in existing security arrangement. It was the year of the Swiss Chairmanship of the Organization for Security and Cooperation, as it has been mentioned, but it was also the year of the 100th anniversary of the outbreak of World War I and the 200th anniversary of the beginning of the Vienna Congress. Both anniversaries invite us also to think in broader and longer terms. What happened at the end of the Cold War is what usually happened after major wars in Europe. There was a shift in power, states disappeared, and new states emerged. The successor states of the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia, the Czech Republic and Slovakia, the unified Germany. However, many things were different. European real wars were usually concluded with comprehensive peace treaties that defined a new balance of powers. Institutions like the Congress system after the Napoleonic Wars emerged, or as we have here, the League of Nations. The 1990 Paris Charter for a New Europe is a rather weak framework, hardly more than a declaration of intent on principles and values. The CSCE, Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, eventually became the OSCE, but this was more an issue of branding than true institution building. What does this mean? Are we in need of new commitments? Do we need to give the existing commitments new meanings? Do we need new or enhanced institutions? Here I would like to make some personal remarks. I am deeply convinced that the values and principles the states agreed upon at the end of the Cold War are still valid. They are still relevant. There is no need to renegotiate or update them. There would even be the danger of watering them down. The challenge is implementing what has been agreed upon. We need to put our efforts there. And there is something else. We lack a culture of mutual accountability. We lack a culture of openness. We lack a culture of confidence. Thereby, we lack confidence, openness, and mutual accountability. That is what we should focus on. The mindset is more fundamental than new institutions or new documents. But this is harder to achieve. It is more intrusive as well. The OSCE constitutes, in my view, an excellent framework for building that mindset. The CSCE has proved that it could be successful during one of the most critical periods in human history, during the Cold War. I envy, therefore, my Serbian colleagues because of their important task in their capacity as the incoming chairman in office. Some people neglect the OSCE because it is in some way a weak organization. However, its weakness is its strength and its major asset. The OSCE does not have the military might of NATO, nor is the Security Council close as with UN bodies. That's the OSCE's comparative advantage and the basis for the special role. I served as a coordinator during the last OSCE chairmanship in 1996. Switzerland took over the chairmanship from Hungary some 2 months after the Dayton Agreement that put an end to the war in Bosnia. Suddenly, OSCE was given an important and unexpected role. It was quite similar to the second Swiss OSCE chairmanship last year. There was a thorough planning for 2014, and I quote, fostering security and stability and improving people's lives, strengthening OSCE's capacity to act, and so on. There is nothing wrong with that, but it sounds quite abstract. Then the planning was suddenly overtaken by the crisis that unfolded. We rapidly became involved in what happened in and around Ukraine, and the words took on a real meaning. Our aim was to act as a honest broker, to de-escalate the situation, and to prepare for a solution the parties have to find themselves. For those tasks, it was very useful for Switzerland to have good relations with all those involved, including and particularly with Russia, not being a member of NATO and the EU, but having close relations with both was helpful. Being a neutral country, not using military means in the pursuit of foreign policy objectives was helpful as well. Our own domestic political system that entails permanent and often tough negotiations among people with diverging interests is, in my view, a good breeding ground for such a role. What was done? The special monitoring mission in Ukraine was established. It monitors developments in all of Ukraine, with the exception, of course, of Crimea. The mission was set up in March 2014. Currently, 41 countries participate in it. Monitoring, reporting, and providing transparency constitutes an important and often underestimated role in situations of tension and conflict. The Trilateral Contact Group, Russia, Ukraine, OSCE, aims to get the parties to fully implement the Minsk agreement. The OSCE is represented by Ambassador Heidi Tagliavini, a senior Swiss diplomat, and we are very happy that her role has been confirmed by the Serbian Chairmanship. There are, of course, many other avenues to explore. I will not ponder on this. I hope we will come back afterwards, and then I hope we will have a chance to discuss about this. There is also the panel of eminent persons on European security with 15 members, Ambassador Ischinger, who is primus inter pares, and then 2 panelists who are among us today, Jane Harmon and Alexander Shahi. And I'm very looking forward and hope we will have a chance to look at this. So I had to shorten a little bit to not make nervous Professor Kellerhans, but I think we will come back on one or the other of the issues I had to skip. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Now I would like to invite Mr. Vladimir Jovicic for his statement, please.
Well, first I would like to thank the Wilson Center for this opportunity, and I would also like to especially commend and to say my congratulations on the great job to our Swiss colleagues for their chairmanship in the previous year, which in a way left us very, very good inputs and very good value for our work in this upcoming year. What is also important for the chairmanship of the OSCE, I would try actually to cover this story, and I'll try, but I don't promise that I will be able to be short as Ambassador was. So I'll try just to shortly explain how it came that we have this so-called consecutive presidency and what the idea was. First of all, the model that we have launched together with our Swiss colleagues was actually planned 4 or 5 years ago. We then ministers, Minister Jeremic and Del Rey, yeah. And basically the idea was to give some more institutional continuity and some more predictability in the works of the organization. So what we could not envisage in the moments when we were planning that was that we would be faced with the Ukrainian crisis, which pretty much impacted the plan of work and joint plan of action we had. The important thing that I would like also to stress is that the OSCE Troika now has a new important member, and that's Germany, next chair in the office, which for sure will give some added value to our efforts. So I'll just try to be short in going through the elements that I'm going to present in my points. First of all, we would try to continue the good work of our Swiss colleagues, trying to be an honest broker in approaching all of the crises we are now facing. Of course, the OSCE is a very, very complex organization that has lots to offer, as Ambassador clearly stated and rightly stated. And state of the fact is that what we are now faced with is that topic of the topics is going to be Ukrainian crisis. At one hand, we have to, in a way, keep focus on that pretty much overwhelming event, overwhelming crisis, while at the same time trying to keep an eye of some sort of bigger strategic outlook that this organization can offer. It's needless to say that our chairmanship came in a very difficult moment, and the activities we had in just like these first 2 weeks, like calling the special sessions of the Permanent Council, facing the attacks and facing the intensification of fighting, shows that we're going to be faced with very, very tough decisions and tough work ahead of us. The good thing is that actually this context of, in a way, consecutive presidencies provided us exactly with what we wanted. This, in a way, predictability and institutional stability, because we pretty much kept all of the special representatives with their institutional knowledge and their previous experiences. We were pretty much going on and keeping on the joint plan of activities we presented in 2013, and addressing the Ukrainian crisis, which I said is now the core issue for the OSCE, means that we are addressing mostly through the instruments that were set up during the Swiss Chairmanship, which is on one hand the SMM, the Special Monitoring Mission, the field missions, and especially work of the Ambassador Tagliavini as a special representative. So in that sense, I would like also to commend both the Ambassador Apakan, who is the head of the SMM, and the Ambassador Tagliavini for their great work. Talking about the concrete steps, what we are trying to achieve as a chairmanship and as a joint effort of all the participating states, we're basically aiming, we see how it looks on the ground, to achieving sustainable ceasefire and full cessation of hostilities. In that sense, implementation of the Minsk documents is essential thing. Both the Special Monitoring Mission and the Special Representatives, as I said, are the key instruments we are going to have. But depending on the situation, we would be more than happy to see developments which would enable OSCE to use all the scope, all the instruments and all the tools that exist there. Either confidence building, either reconciliation, but unfortunately how it looks right now, I'm not sure that we are close to that. So what we as a chairmanship in a way reiterated on a number of occasions is that we want to continue work as an honest broker, to be predictable, to be transparent in our work, and in a way we also have to be aware that it's a joint responsibility of all the key stakeholders and participating states to engage in creating an environment that will be conducive to the dialogue and reaching the compromise. And what our MFA on a number of occasions stated is that this compromise cannot be reached at the expense of the OSCE norms and principles that we have all committed to adhere to. Trying to be fast and swift in this presentation, I'm going just to go through some other elements which are also important for the OSCE in this upcoming year, and which is again based on the priorities and on the crisis that we are facing. One of the topics are the protracted conflicts. The second point which I would like to address is the terrorism, extremism, and radicalism, which obviously appears as a new element. And I would like just shortly to touch upon our region, Western Balkans, and also the question of the Helsinki Plus 40 and the future of the OSCE. When we talk about the protracted conflicts, which in a way are also one of the very important elements of the OSCE activities, we would like to try to continue with the high-level contacts between the parties engaging in these conflicts and to continue these meetings without any hindrance. That would be for us the first part, the first step, in order to achieve some new steps which we think are able. I mean, we all are aware that at the end of the day, the key to advancing the peace process in all of these cases is connected with the political will and lies mainly with the parties. But what we would like to do is to continue the dialogue, and then, as the Swiss Special Representative and our Swiss colleagues try to do, through some smaller steps, concrete steps, try to build up an environment that would be good enough and probable for tackling the substantive problems. In that sense, we would, as I said, one of the key messages that we gave is that we would try to use all of the OSCE tools. But again, that means that we will need to reach some certain level of political will in the organization, which is a consensus driven. When it comes to the extremism, terrorism, and radicalization, well, the events in the Paris shows us that some of the freedoms and some of the values that are we are thinking now already granted and guaranteed are being taken for granted. So that means that we have to strike a very, very, let's say, a tough balance. That on one hand we have to be univocal in the condemning and the fighting the terrorism, while on the other hand we have to use the tools and assets that we have in order to prevent, let's say, some deeper gaps in our societies, to actually do what OSCE does good, to foster tolerance, to foster non-discrimination in our societies, while fighting the terrorism and extremism and radicalization, which are obviously taking ground even in the countries that you would never expect to see. Talking about our region, well, I actually put Western Balkans, much further on my topics, but I didn't want to see someone who's hijacking this short time. Well, for us, it was very important. There was lots of rising eyebrows. What is Serbia doing here, and why are they running for the chairmanship? Where we thought that, having in mind our experiences, and having in mind the fact that this is not the first chairmanship we're having regarding all of the reserves, we can give some added values, especially having in mind the important role that OSCE played in our region in the previous period. So in that sense, I would basically just say that we would try to use, not only in our region, but in wider scope, all of the possibilities that OSCE has with the cross-dimensional approach, with working through all the three dimensions, which, as I said, once again, our Swiss colleagues had done a really good job in implementing. And what I also wanted to say is that, trying to act as our Swiss predecessors, being unbiased and being an honest broker doesn't mean that everyone is going to like you. So we are pretty much prepared for that. And one of the things, talking about the future of the OSCE and the fact that we're entering the 40th anniversary of the organization, I would, once again stress what Ambassador stressed, that, one of the good decisions of the chairmanship was to implement the panel of the eminent person, whose two members I see here, and I would like also to greet. And we think that regardless of certain reserves we have faced in this, and our colleagues have faced, we think it's a good move. We think it could be very beneficial for exchange of ideas and for looking forward to the 40th anniversary organization, which we hope we would face in much better and much more relaxed situation. So I would like to avoid going through, as I said, joint work plan, and I would like to conclude now and rest everything for the questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jovicic. Now I would like to invite Ambassador Shari to give his statement, please.
Okay. First of all, it's a big honor and responsibility to be today with you. A lot of thanks, Wilson Center and Zurich University for invitation. With your help, I'm here. And I have 4 points which I want to deliver to you. My first point, that I'm sure everybody agree with me that in 2014, Ukrainian crisis in country and around the country was the key challenge for European security. To my mind, for 2 reasons. Because Ukraine, one of the biggest European country in the heart of the Europe, and the second, that this is country between 2 greats, Russia and Western structure in Europe, NATO and EU. So for me personally, this crisis, I foresee this crisis because Ukraine in very difficult position, and because in the crisis inside of the country, we provoke the crisis around the country. Unfortunately, a bad news that crisis continue. I am 100% sure that we now not reach the final lowest point in this crisis, and next weeks will be very, very dangerous weeks, and next months especially. And unfortunately, this crisis also have a very clear global negative influences, because this crisis very deeply connected with non-proliferation issues. Because Ukrainian security, and I personally participate in it, were based on so-called Budapest Memorandum, and we gave up the set stockpile of nuclear weapons in the world, instead for security assurances from P5 countries. And when we left some part of our territory, and this is insurance not work effectively, it practically means that in future the international society never use the same mechanism to persuade any country in the world to stop nuclear programs. It's also provoked Ukrainian radicals and some politician groups to put in parliament the question about to restore our nuclear potential. And take into account that Ukraine is a very advanced technical country, a country which possesses the modest rocket technologies, it's not only a theoretic danger. And the set, I think maybe not a lot of persons in this hall very clearly understand that the biggest in Europe nuclear power station, Zaporozhye power station, are located only 200 kilometers from the zone of conflicts. And the next power station, it's approximately 400 kilometers from the zone of conflict. So any further escalation of conflict involved, this is two biggest in Europe power nuclear station in zone of conflict. So it's another very dangerous perspectives. And also the Donbas region, it's a very highly industrial developed region with a lot of huge amount of chemical factories, metallurgy factory, energy center. So it's really a very big tragedy if conflict will be escalate further and further. It's my first message. My second message, I am very, very satisfied that Switzerland was the chairman in 2014. Because Switzerland, a neutral country, it's very, very important. And Switzerland diplomacy for centuries have experienced ability to manage such very difficult conflicts. And I congratulate Switzerland chairmanship. They reached the key results at the end of the year 2014. During the final ministerial meeting in Basel, the guns was stopped and we reached ceasefire. It was a huge result, and it's because Switzerland pushed three, as to me, very important instruments to reach these results. First of all, trilateral contact group and mission of Ambassador Tagliavini, so-called Minsk process. And thanks to these achievements, we reached ceasefire, effective ceasefire at the end of the 2014. Next, Switzerland helped to develop three, as to me, very important instruments, special monitoring mission, which control this ceasefire. And Switzerland proposed idea to increase dramatically the member of this mission up to 500 persons. It's a very huge mission. And next instrument, this is observer mission, which are responsible for control of Ukrainian-Russian border in zone of conflict. So to my mind, Switzerland reached real results during the chairmanship period to reach ceasefire and to create real instruments which I'm sure will be very helpful to manage this conflict in the future. My third point is addressed to next president, to Serbia. To my mind, the key challenge now that Minsk arrangement not works. So it's very important now to do all the best to push on all parties involved in conflicts to restart implementation of Minsk arrangements. Now some rumors that maybe tomorrow it will be meeting in Minsk, but to my mind, I am not think it will be in such way, because conflict now in very fragile situation, and I personally expect next escalation next days. But to my mind, only two possibilities now to enforce as much as possible capabilities of special monitoring mission, maybe to increase quantity of personnel, maybe to give more effective mandate of this mission, and of course it's a very strong desire of Ukraine to increase capabilities of OSCE observer mission to establish effective control on Ukrainian-Russian border, not permit to infiltrate from Russia to Ukraine armed people and armament. And to my mind, 3 days ago, Ukrainian parliament adopted, as to me, very important and historic decision and declared that the Russia Federation is aggressor in this conflict. To my mind, the key challenge now for Serbia chairman, how to implement this is new shift in developing the conflict, and what will be language OSCE in next meetings how to respond to this new initiative of Ukrainian government and Ukrainian parliament. But to my mind, the key challenge for Serbia chairmanship and for future German leading role in OSCE, it's to shift the focus of our attention. Now all of us are concentrate how to reach ceasefire. It's correct on the early stage of conflict, but practically no one are thinking about future formula of peaceful settlement. What will be the elements of this formula of future settlement? And to my mind, I propose 3 ideas as to me, which first of all, we can use the idea of a cooperative security to find the future settlement formula. I personally, for many, many years, support idea of future neutrality of Ukraine. To transfer Ukraine in the bridge between West and East. It's, to my mind, only one real formula which permit us to save OSCE as organization in future, to restart Helsinki process, and to start to really construct a conception of wider Europe or wide transatlantic space, security space and economic space from Vancouver to Vladivostok. I was very encouraged with Merkel's statement in Davos. To my mind, it's a very strong message. And I know that Russians also are ready to support such approach. But now, unfortunately, the political situation inside of Ukraine and international environments may be not in favor of implementation of such idea, but to my mind it's necessary to do. My second proposal that OSCE has immediately started to think how to implement peacekeeping elements in zone of conflicts. How to divide with international peacekeeping component both sides, especially if now Russia is declared as aggressor from Ukrainian legal system. So from this point of view, I think now we need some international independent component which divide Ukrainian armed forces and armed forces of separatist region which are strongly supported by Russia, which now qualified as aggressor. If we are not doing in such way, I think it will be impossible to reach effective and sustainable ceasefire in the zone of conflict. And my third proposal, we need immediately to start with help of OSCE and maybe with Council of Europe and United Nations to start reconciliation process inside of Ukraine and outside of Ukraine. Maybe to start to put forward the idea about Ukrainian-Russian reconciliation to use experience of French-German reconciliation. French-German reconciliation permit to end the Second World War. Ukrainian-Russian reconciliation need to the whole continent to end the Cold War. The problem, it's my view, that Cold War never was ended with formal agreement. So we need, it's my fourth idea, we need, if we go in the right direction, we need new Helsinki conference, which will be the final conference to end the Cold War. And my conclusion, I very strongly support the previous speaker, which gave us very excellent information about League of Nations. One of the key mistakes of League of Nations was, as I've heard, that it's not appropriate react on the first aggression acts in the sphere of responsibility. So I think the OSCE and other international institutions now have a very great challenge to find the proper reaction, to proper answer to this aggression challenge in the heart of the Europe. And a lot of things, the President of Switzerland, which proposed my candidature to be in this very eminent group, and I try to do all my best to put forward some ideas how to find maybe new, maybe not standard, but some new approaches how to finalize in proper way to find a magic settlement formula of this is very dangerous for global and for your European security conflict. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Now I would like to invite Mr. Maxim Trudodolyubov to to give somehow a Russian view here, please.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you, Wilson Center, for inviting me here in the first place and having this unique opportunity to study and do my research in this excellent environment. I'm in an unenviable position, of course, here. I'm not going to speak for Russia, I have to say.
It's good.
Because I'm a journalist, thank God. I'm not an official. I've covered mostly domestic politics before. I also, but since probably last year, Russia's domestic agenda has basically spilled over to the rest of the world. It's now everyone's concern, I'm afraid. So I will try and give you a brief sketch of what I think is Russia's foreign policy, Russia's understanding of security and security in Europe, and what we all can probably do about it in the future. To start with, I mean, you have to understand, it's really mind-boggling for a Russian to watch essentially what is a war between Russia and Ukraine. This is incredible. It's, I mean, it's in almost in everyone's family, actually, because in my case, my wife is half Ukrainian, and there are lots of families like that. For most of the Russians, actually, it's almost impossible to understand what's going on. Actually, it's difficult. But let's see what we can do. Russia's foreign policy is really is a very strange phenomenon. It's an arch-realistic, tough foreign policy to the extent that it actually already led to an armed conflict or war between the two nations that no one would believe will ever do this. What happened last year, essentially, is that Russia broke out of the post-Cold War security architecture, whatever you call it, whatever you call this arrangement that existed in Europe. I'm afraid it's no longer there, actually. We are in uncharted territory. There are two main avenues for Russia's foreign policy, two main areas where Russia acts very actively. First is so-called near abroad, something that Russia considers, the Kremlin considers its sphere of influence, former Soviet Union, let's say. And it's important to understand that what happened in that situation on the principal level since, let's say, 2008, since the war with Georgia. Russia has demonstrated in 2008 that it will go to war over a situation that it considers threat, in the sense that a country that is part of so-called near abroad may join NATO, may join a Western-led security alliance. So Russia has shown that. The second lesson is that the West demonstrated in 2008 that Western countries won't use force in that situation, because a country that is not part of NATO wouldn't enjoy the kind of protection, which is, well, natural, because it's not part of NATO. So that's where we are, basically, and that has been clear and open and known to everyone since 2008. The second very important area where Russia is acting is the rest of Europe abroad. And there's a very peculiar strategy there, which is, I think, quite clear by now. Russia is supporting fringe political forces in Europe, both extreme left and extreme right. And I mean, to a certain extent, Russia has been incredibly successful. We have to admit this. Political forces like Jobbik party in Hungary, Ataka party in Bulgaria, National Front in France, Syriza in Greece. The political forces just enjoyed incredible landslide victory in the Greek elections this week. Russia exploits political differences. Russia no longer supports any particular ideology. Russia supports views and ideologies and forces that would be able to be Russia's tool, instrument, political instrument in Europe. Essentially, this is done to disrupt, to play the game, to try and tip the balance in its own favor, which is possible to do, in fact, because foreign policy in Europe is done by agreement. Everyone has to agree. Everyone has to vote for a certain foreign policy measure, including sanctions. So in case essentially every nation enjoys a veto over major decisions like sanctions. And using these opportunities, Russia has been already successful in creating a certain doubt among European political leaders, and we know that basically in today's news, if you see the news that European Union ministers have essentially, I think, failed to agree on their future position on renewing sanctions against Russia. Russia, the Kremlin, I would say, better put it like this, the Kremlin has been incredibly successful in exploiting differences and playing the game, dividing and ruling, if you will. I think the situation is we are really, as I said, in uncharted waters since last year. I think that we all have to understand it. I'm not in any position to advise on any country's foreign policy, but I think that the situation is urgent. We have to understand. Everyone has to understand Russia better, but everyone also has to think hard how to try and get Russia back to the process of negotiation. It seems that currently what the Kremlin and the Vladimir Putin are doing, they're again back to their tactics. They're trying to change facts on the ground to try and start the process of negotiations anew. I don't think the Minsk agreements are actually well and alive. I don't think. I'm not sure you can actually go back to that. It's probably the situation where we're looking forward to some kind of new agreement and have to work on the future. I will just conclude by saying that what the Kremlin is doing is essentially waging a war for people's minds. Let's put it like this. I mean, this is a real war in Ukraine. People are dying, more than 5,000, but already by now. But it's also it is also a war for people's minds in Europe and in this country as well. It's an attempt to try and show that the Western ways, the Western worldview, the Western security architecture as a continuation of the Western kind of thinking and probably triumphalist thinking of the past 25 years is no longer working, is no longer there. Russia is trying to change that, to be, as Putin would say continuously, an equal partner in reshaping the world order, whatever he means by that. The difficulty is it's usually very hard to understand what are the specific goals and what the Kremlin is actually pursuing. But to the best of my understanding, it's an attempt to get Russia back to some kind of round table with the world's leading nations that would sit down and redraw something that we call the world order. No less than that, I'm afraid. So whatever ways global community, the world community, diplomats, foreign policy makers will find to try and get closer to some kind of negotiation process, I think it's very important to start doing this. It's urgent. It has to be done as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Trudolyubov. May I just maybe stay there and ask you a question? Did I understand you correctly? Would you say that the West, in a way, reacted too weakly on this Russian aggression? Would you say that if we would have, been firmer earlier, we wouldn't be there where we are yet now, or?
Well, it's really difficult to assess the Western reaction. I think the Western reaction has been pretty robust in the sense of the transatlantic cooperation on sanctions. In that sense, it probably worked. But on the other hand, when I listened to President Obama speaking recently in his State of the Nation address, essentially saying, sort of sounding almost triumphalist, and saying that Russia is isolated, Russia's economy is in tatters. I think that's what he said. I'm not sure it's the case, actually, and I'm not in any way saying that the West has to do something drastic, and I'm not in a position to advise. But I think that there's a certain failure to understand the gravity of the situation. The Kremlin's vision of the world order is it's really changed, or it's become evident for the past year or so, and the global community has to deal with it seriously, address it, talk to Kremlin, work not just in public but through all channels that are available to other world leaders.
Ambassador Dahinden, you stressed the importance of the OSCE, and my question here is it really a success story that we have there? Or could we have done more earlier, in a way, to go towards Russia and, in a way, prevent the situation where we are now?
I mean, this is almost a rhetoric question. I cannot say, well, everything works fine, because you were finding yourself in a situation you don't like. I do not overestimate either the role of the OSCE. When I was pointing out of the advantages of the weakness, was just to show the specific role in a bigger setting. But the OSCE, of course, is not an organization that to some extent can put the framework. There are members there. They are well in a position, individual nations or coalitions. But I think things have gone wrong. We had in the early 1990s, to a significant extent, a common understanding. Maybe in Russia, maybe in other parts of Europe, it was not really accepted, and people felt they were defeated by what happened. And then, to a certain extent, there was not a kind of process with confidence-building measures that in a sustainable way build trust and build confidence. I do not think that we can apply the model, with all due respect, to come together and have a kind of Vienna conference or Versailles setting to renegotiate the security structures in Europe. I think rather that we should stick to the principles and then try to establish a kind of process, as it has been during the Cold War. And to a certain extent, we are again in a situation of Cold War. I don't think a negotiated solution is possible, and also of a broader European security arrangement. And I'm sure about this also because if you look at multilateralism, how it works and how it doesn't work, you don't put all your eggs in that direction and think a big conference on reshaping Europe will get a kind of treaty we missed after the Cold War.
Mr. Jovic, do you agree with this view, or would you be willing to call for a second Helsinki conference, as it was suggested, to redraw or to end in a way officially the Cold War?
To be a bit ironic, maybe, I mean, we first have to see how we are going to, mark 40 years of the Helsinki, and then we'll see whether we get the conference. But state of the union is, as someone would say here, is that it's not good. We have a situation where, as Ambassador clearly stated, the crisis in Ukraine and the situation around Ukraine definitely creates a grave threat for the security, not only there in the region, but also for the European context. However, I'm not really sure that this is maybe the moment or point in time in which we should be maybe running for something like that, for some sort of grandeur approach where we would be having some, as Ambassador said, some sort of Versailles or Vienna conference. What we are trying to do, and what was the recipe in the previous period, is actually trying to adhere to certain principles. And it's, problem is that, I don't want to now go deeper, problem is that, we had in previous period cases where principles have been broken and they have been breached, and the state of the fact is that it's being used or misused in some other situations. So what the best thing we can do right now is to basically adhere to basically follow the principles. It's similar thing with, as Maxim mentioned about the Minsk document. Well, maybe there are attempts, or maybe there are ideas that someone wants to change the situation and then basically make this document dead. But for us, in the role of a chairman, or for someone that has to deal with that, we need to have something from which we're going to start. And that's, in OSCE case, Helsinki, or in this case, Minsk document, because those are the frameworks we're giving to play with in the current situation.
Is it going to help that Serbia usually had a closer relationship to Russia than
Well,
other countries?
You know, the thing is, as we said, and you know, it was always very often asked from us, you know, we're going to try to, in a way, use all of the contacts and all of the relations, which are fairly good with pretty much all the stakeholders. But as I said previously, the fact that we're going to use it and try to be an honest broker doesn't mean, and unfortunately for our Swiss colleagues, they felt it very good during the chairmanship, everyone might not understand it in the right way. Because reaching the agreement or reaching certain results does not mean that everyone is going to be happy. So what we can try to do is to be transparent and be predictable and be open with the things we're doing. And that was frankly what we were doing before taking over the chairmanship, which means that, you know, one of the first meetings that our MFA had before this was the Ukraine, European countries, Russia. We had our task force coming here to US to discuss everything parallelly with that, and we're going to have some more interaction here in the US during the February. So, you know, that's what we can do. That's the framework we can play in.
Ambassador Charlie, if things really go bad, as you said, might be the case, what do you expect from the West? What do you expect from the United States? What can be done?
One technical remarks. When you represent me, you declare that I am foreign advisor of President. I was former advisor of President Yushchenko, but now I am not foreign advisor of President Poroshenko. Some misunderstanding because the surname of foreign advisor of Poroshenko also Mr. Charlie, but Valery. I am Alexander. But very interesting that he very good friend of me, and we study in the same school in the same city, Vinnytsia in Ukraine. So sometimes misunderstanding. But it's very important because my position is not official position. If I will be foreign advisor, maybe I will be more accurate. Okay. Concerning really, I am not optimistic about next week's, next month, and what I think Ukraine nation expect from West. You here in the West, in Washington especially, now have to adopt strategic decision. You now on the crossroad. We try to decide Ukrainian crisis through peaceful settlement formula. So it's obvious for me, and I'm sure for all, that without Russia as a part of the decision, it's impossible to find a peaceful settlement formula. Unfortunately, till now, nobody in practical diplomacy terms tried to speak with Russia as a part of decision. Now we speak with Russia as an obstacle of the decision. So if we not change negative approach to finding peaceful formula for positive approach where Russia will be the part of decision, we never reach a peaceful formula decision. Or if you are not in position to do it, and one of the problems, the situation inside of Ukraine, majority of Ukrainian political elite now is non-positioned to, in real terms, to find peaceful settlement formula with Russia. So we produce this as question before your elite, because you respect democracy and democracy vision of Ukrainian parliament, Ukrainian government, for you some kind of must. Or if we are not in position to find real peaceful formula, we have as soon as possible to clarify this is conflict in very clear definitions. Aggression, occupied territory, line of division. Practically we go back to Cold War period. And the results of such approach, I call this scenario Cold War scenario, that we very clearly understand that in a few very, very short period, we receive situation like Northern Korea and South Korea, Western Germany and East Germany in former history. And so my idea, if we adopt the second decision, we have international community as soon as possible to put peacekeeping component to divide. Because now we have direct conflicts on the territory of Ukraine between Russian practically troops and Ukrainian troops. And it's not war between Ukraine and Russia. Russia war against Ukraine on the territory of Ukraine. It's very dangerous. So from this point of view, I think now we have a strategic uncertainty. We have situation neither war, neither peace. It's the most dangerous scenario for Ukraine's stability. Because in this situation, Ukraine like cancer, and we not use any radical treatment against cancer. And from my point of view, it's the best scenario for Mr. Putin, because in such way, she destabilizes Ukrainian social economic life. And Ukraine have no stable formula of security even for the next 4 weeks. What about the reforms in such situation? What about the possible investments? So Ukraine and international community need some difficult decision, but very honest answer. If we try to keep situation in uncertainty from strategic point of view, Ukraine can collapse next 3-6 months. And it will be a very negative influence for the whole European, even economic security, because Ukrainian collapse of Ukrainian financial system or Ukrainian default, to my mind, will influence even more than Greek default. So from this point of view, we need very clear strategic decision concerning the conflict. So I wish it to Serbian leadership in OSCE. Second, Minsk is not died. Minsk is the best formula for ceasefire. So I congratulate you. But Minsk have a lack of potential to develop peaceful settlement formula, because peaceful settlement formula impossible to develop without direct involvement in process United States and Germany. Because United States responsible for geopolitical aspects of this conflict and Germany for geoeconomic aspects of this conflict. So I very strongly support formula which totally coincides with today's event to transfer some peace from Minsk, some center of negotiation to Geneva, and to restart Geneva process, because Geneva process involved EU and United States. So from this point, Geneva have a good chance to be a new conference place for very important decisions. And finally, to my mind, it's very good that now the Troika include Germany, because Germany have a special responsibility for Eastern Europe security space. And to my mind, the next leadership of Germany in OSCE maybe help us to find final formula of settlement of this conflict.
Okay, thank you very much for this statement. Now I'd like to open the floor for questions. Maybe from the floor, I see a hand back there, please. Mister, there's a microphone coming.
My name's Thomas Grindley. Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia were the principals in both the formation and dissolution of the Soviet Union. How do you explain the different approaches that Ukraine and Belarus are taking in dealing with their larger neighbor?
To whom is the question directed?
To the panel.
Who on the panel wants to answer the question? Different approach by Belarus and Ukraine towards Russia. You, please.
Look, you are completely correct. In Belaverskaya Pushcha was concluded Belaversky agreement, which practically destroyed the former Soviet Union. It's correct. And Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia were the founder of this agreement. But what are the differences? Look, Ukraine, it's a country which in present border practically exists from after the Second World War. This country lived in this border. Some part of Ukraine for a long part was part of Austrian Empire, some part of Ottoman Empire, some part of Russian Empire. So Ukrainian identity very complex. Ukraine is practically Switzerland of 21st century. And my formula, really, in 15 years ago, being ambassador in Romania, I delivered a thesis that I dreamed that Ukraine will be a Switzerland of 21st century. As you told us, President Wilson told that Switzerland demonstrate in early of 20th century wisdom how to live together with different languages, with different countries. So we need this as wisdom of Switzerland now in Ukraine as never. But Ukraine political spectrum more difficult than political spectrum in Belarus. Belarus more country with more stronger identity, one identity. In Ukraine exists three identity till now. So after the independence, this is three identity create difficult balances concerning the Ukrainian-Russian policy. And we immediately declare some reservation to CIS agreement. We never recognize themselves as a member of CIS, only as the party who signed signature under the agreement. So Ukraine, from the very beginning, from 1991, try to develop balanced relations with Russia, friendly relations with Russia, but we keep our independence very strongly. In Belarus case, because they are more identity country, and because Lukashenko as a strong leader, elected presidential election in 1994, as I remember, they develop another formula of relations with Russia. But now it's very interesting to see that Lukashenko also tried to find, especially after Ukrainian case, after Ukrainian crisis, both Lukashenko and Kazakhstan leader Nazarbayev tried to find new approaches to their relations with Russia, because Ukrainian case demonstrate that they also under danger. Despite that they are member of security union with Russia, they are member of economic union with Russia, but Ukrainian case demonstrates some unpredictability of the Russian strategic steps in future. So to my mind, now exist more possibilities to find the new role of Belarus in Eastern European security policy, and the fact that Minsk was proposed as a city where we find a ceasefire compromise, it's also very symbolic.
Mm-hmm. I saw a hand, Mr. Chibutaro, please.
Thank you. My name is Viril Chibutaro. I'm from Republic of Moldova, and I'm very happy that I represent two organizations, European Institute for Political Studies, which is a partner with Europa Institute, and I'm a senior fellow of Geneva Center for Democratic Control of the Armed Forces. And I would like maybe a small remark, as we are discussing the security challenging for Europe in 2015. I would like maybe a little bit to extend the geographical area, because actually I think Moldova is also object of Russian aggression, even if we are not under the military operation yet. And the question is actually, what do you think this development, might it be more extensive like in history when Russian occupied the Crimea? Then next point was to capture Odessa port, and then delta of Danube, and then Bosphor. It's a kind of joke, but we see after the withdrawal of Russia from CFE treaty, there is no anymore any verification mechanism what Russia is now establishing in Crimea, which kind of warfare there is appearing, and this actually new military situation is creating new risks for general for the Black Sea region, and many countries, Romania, Bulgaria, Greece also are raising their military concerns about the possible extension of what now is called hybrid war in Donbass, in Ukraine, or irregular war. What do you think about this? And my second question, how can we use the history and the experience of dealing with Transnistrian conflict? Because both here is OSCE is fully involved, and the Ukraine is part of this process. Do you think the Transnistrian conflict settlement can be used as a lessons learned for now the questions that you raised, and actually might it be the test for Russian to trust or not, if we will take into account latest two very interesting facts that Russia refused to supply anymore to allocate in Transnistria 100 million US dollars for surviving this region, and second declaration of Karasin that Russia will may restart thinking to a final solution for Transnistrian conflict. Is it so? This question I would like. Thank you.
Maybe Mr. Jovicic, you want to
Yes, maybe
answer?
just a short touch upon that. I mean, we all have to basically go within the framework when it comes to Transnistria, because special representative of our MFA, Mr. Ambassador Bogovic, is actually included in the interaction there in Transnistria. And we had some, let's say, limited success in the previous period when it comes to the restarting talks and attempts to have some concrete steps when it concerns the establishing of some sort of, let's say, confidence-building measures. However, I wouldn't go now into these greater details about the, geopolitics and everything, because I have to, stick to the OSCE agenda and to the OSCE jurisdiction. What we can do is, as I said, when it comes to the protracted conflicts, the core thing in the upcoming period is to keep dialogue ongoing, to avoid situation in which we have a moment where we have any sort of rise of tensions, to avoid any situation in which it turns into some sort of a conflict, but rather trying to work on this in a way confidence-building measure, be it with, I don't know, joint policing, exchange of information, engaging between the structures that exist on the ground, and then trying with those measures to maybe establish a possibility to address some, let's say, space for going into talking about comprehensive solutions. However, as I said, we have a clear mandate when it comes to the OSCE mission and the format that we are deploying there through our special representative and through the OSCE. US were also included, our ambassador was also included. But as I said, we need to work on creating an environment which would be conducive to going into the essential dialogue. Other from that, I mean, I wouldn't go into this larger geopolitics, but as a chairman, as someone representing the chairmanship, but those are the things we can do. And of course, when it comes to the lessons learned, both the lessons we have learned in our own region, in Western Balkans, are, well, say, implementable up to a certain point, both in Transnistria and maybe in Ukraine tomorrow, if we get to the phase where we can actually talk about these comprehensive solutions or the, as you said, permanent solutions. But in that sense, we're going to basically continue work we already have done in the previous period. What the results will be, that's probably $1 million question, because on the other hand, state of the fact is that the Ukraine conflict, in a way, as I said, is now the topic. That's someone that everyone deals with. And that, as I think Ambassador Gnedinger, when he was here earlier in 2014, in December actually, stated not about Transnistria, but for instance about the Caucasus, that's the situation where you have less assets, you have less, in a way, possibilities to engage in this. But as I said, the core thing is continuing the dialogue, preventing any sort of hindrance of the already existing formats, and going on the step-to-step measures. Everything aside from that, everything that can be achieved above that would be a huge plus. For huge, bigger picture in geopolitics, I would now refrain and maybe give floor to someone else.
Maybe Ambassador Tahin, it was mentioned that we should have peacekeeping troops there in Ukraine. Do you see any chance that not even peace enforcement, peacekeeping troops, right? Do you see any chance that we can come to
Well,
that?
here I'm really speaking not on behalf of Switzerland as a member of the Troika. We all know that there would basically be the political legal basis for OSCE to carry out peacekeeping, but I have my doubts. I think if kind of peacekeeping operation should be carried out, there are other structures, particularly UN structures, much more prepared to carry this out. The OSCE does far not have the kind of command structure and military capability that would be required. This being said, I would not exclude that this could be, let's say, an element in a desescalation of the situation. Only I would not see very much the OSCE building up this capacity.
Okay. We have about 5 minutes left, and I see 2 hands up there, please. Maybe the first gentleman here to the right. Yes, please, thank you.
Alexander Zaitsev, professor of Ukrainian Catholic University and visiting scholar at the Kennan Institute here. My question is to Ambassador Alexander Chali. First of all, I would disagree with your proposal to continue the policy of neutrality of Ukraine and your concept of Ukraine as a bridge between West and East. As for me, I would not like to live on a bridge. I think it's very inconvenient and even dangerous. And I think that all attempts to transform Ukraine into a bridge with your participation completely failed, with disastrous results for Ukraine. And my question is, why do you think it is better for Ukraine to continue this policy of bridges, of neutralities, instead of making decisive choice in favor of probably long and difficult way of joining to European unity and NATO? Why do you think that, don't you think that only membership of Ukraine in NATO would be only guarantee of security of Ukraine, in contrast to Budapest Memorandum, which was the memorandum of assurance and without any guarantees?
Thank you. First of all, I also agree with you that the best solution for Ukrainian security was, is, and will be membership in NATO. It's agree 100%, but I am realistic. And I knew personally, because I negotiate a lot of Ukrainian NATO issues, and now involved in some process, that real possibility for Ukraine to be member of NATO practically equals 0. Not because Ukraine not to be member of NATO, because NATO is not ready and it's not in position, especially now when Ukraine divided country, to be a member of NATO. So I'm very realistic. So from this point of view, I have to find solution what to do for my country. It's the first. Second, I tell that I support finding peaceful settlement, so-called peace formula for settlement of Ukrainian crisis. But as an analyst, I think that 80% that in future, more real formula that Ukraine will be in situation like East and West Germany for some next decade or decades. And maybe in this situation, some part of Ukraine have a chance to be member of NATO. But the price of this membership was a losing of some part of our territory. Some Ukrainian elite politicians are ready to pay such pay for membership in NATO. But I return back to my statement. NATO is not in position to accept Ukraine in, now. Even map for Ukraine impossible. I was foreign advisor of Yushchenko in Bucharest, and we were refused with map. Sometimes people tell, okay, you are not ready, you are not demonstrate struggle against corruption, your population is not support membership in NATO very highly. Now the level of support more stronger than earlier. I gave another example, Georgia. Georgia meets all requirements. A very strong 90% support membership Georgia of NATO. Georgia reached fantastic results with the fight with corruption. demonstrate a very strong transformation in civil society. But even Georgia received zero, no even map concerning the future membership. So it's not our problem, it's problem of NATO. Concerning a good point concerning the possibility of future Helsinki II. If we manage to find strategic solution, to find some formula of peaceful settlement over Ukraine situation with involvement of Russia, we need reconfirmation of Helsinki Act and Paris Charter. So if we will be managed to fix such conference in future, maybe during the German chairmanship, it practically means that we find a formula which permit us to survive the Helsinki process. If no, we return back in early 50s of previous century, and we start a long way process to pre-Helsinki discussion in 19th of 70s of previous century. So to my mind, we're now in crossroad. But what I'm 100% sure that we need as soon as possible to adopt some strategic decision inside of Ukraine and outside of Ukraine. Situation neither war, neither peace, very dangerous for my statehood of my country. Because if we are not give a very strong and very strategically oriented decision concerning the security formula for Ukraine, the security umbrella for Ukraine, maybe with involvement peacekeeping forces of United Nations, it's more appropriate. I agree with the ambassador. Destabilization, social, economic destabilization. This is situation neither peace, neither war. Very unclear messages inside of the country. What is war against Russia or ATO, anti-terroristic operation? It will be very tragic results for future development of Ukraine. And so-called third Maidan will take place, and to my mind, it will be with very challenging results for stability of the country. Not only in the east, but in the center, in the south of the country. So from my point of view, we need strategic decision, and now I very strongly support the second decision. If we are not positioned to find a settlement peaceful formula, let's as soon as possible to adopt formula of the Cold War, and adopt formula that as soon as possible we create real ceasefire line and with international element and divide Russian forces and Ukrainian forces, and really very effectively to stop this war and create some barrier like in Northern Korea and South Korea. We need demilitarization zone between Russian troops and Russian occupied territory and Ukrainian territory. Because till now, we in Ukraine even not understand what status of this territory. And you know, it's created a lot of humanitarian challenges. If territory is occupied by Russia, everything clear. We have no question about Crimea. If some problems in Crimea, we know who is responsible for this, Russia. But if some problems in Donbass now with population, humanitarian tragedy, you know that position of Ukrainian government very fragile, because from one point of view we are responsible for them, from another point of view we refuse to deliver pension to them, we refuse to give them free access to the territory of Ukraine, and it's provoked many questions among human rights activists in the West. So to my mind, as soon as possible, we define very clear that Russia is aggressor, and this territory is occupied by Russia. It's against Kremlin, not against Russia. It's permit us, together with help of our Western partners, friends, to start reform inside of the country and to create in future possibility for reunification of Ukraine like Germany.
Thank you very much. We are living in dramatic times, and we wish Ukraine all the very best in the next couple of weeks. With that, we come to the end of the panel discussion. I might hand over the microphone to Michael Dawson.
Thank you, Andy. Just thank all of you for coming. I hope you enjoyed Swiss Day at the Wilson Center. I want to thank our four panelists up here now. I also want to thank Andy Kellehaus of the University of Zurich and Christian Osterman and Emily Bust of the Global Europe program here at the Wilson